How long can you leave a permanent highline rigged and it still be considered super safe enough? We got our hands on some webbing that was rigged for over a year permanently, and we broke test the main, the backup, and some of the most worn spots. And Wade is going to start this video out and explain the context of where it came from and the conditions it was in. Then we're going to get into the brake tests, and then we're going to cover some gear reviews of the most recent gear in the slackline market. And it'll all be timestamped below so you can skip around to the stuff you want to see.
Hello, my name is Wade, and I'm coming to you from Seneca Rocks in wild and wonderful West Virginia. For the last 2 climbing seasons, we've kept a perma rig up here named Moonshine. It's located on private property that's right behind the rocks. The line's at about 2,000 feet elevation above sea level and is exposed to your typical Appalachian elements. So things like wind, rain, lightning, UV, wildlife. And while it's not the craziest of conditions, it did see a pretty good amount of use in its first season. Including beginners, experts, some freestyle, and even a 60-person festival over the course of about 3 days. Since the first time that we started leaving the lineup, there's been a handful of reports and Slack chat conversations about perma rigs. So when we de-rigged the line, I thought it would be a good idea to send a bunch of samples of the webbing to Ryan for him to break and see how our webbing had weathered through the season. Before we get to the results of his brake tests, I have some info about the rig for you. So it's a 120 meter rig using 4 segments of 60 meters each of Mark 1 balanced community lift tube. So 2 segments for the main, 2 segments for the backup. We also used a couple of jibbin extenders for the backup, but there was only a single connection about 50 meters out from the main anchor that consisted of 3 6mm AM steel soft shackles, sheathed in Project 44 and taped in place using electrical tape. The tensioning anchor was a super bomber tree with a couple of span sets in continuous loop around the tree and using 2 titanium rings and 2 9mm AM steel soft shackles. The static anchor is rope equalized off of 2 bomber trees and stabilized and redirected off of 2 smaller trees. We kept the line up from March of 2021 to about November of 2021, and it stayed up the entire time. A few things to note that might be considered variables. We used a single steel bomber leash ring the entire season. The tapes were sliders on the main using 2-inch fiber tape reinforced with Teflon tape. We made a point about once a week to untwist the backup loops from the main. We kept the line intentionally off level by about 10 to 15 feet, with the far side static anchor being the higher side. And this was so that if beginners needed to roll back, it was a lot easier, or if we needed to do a potential rescue, it would be a lot easier as well. We kept the leash ring locked to the web lock when not in use using a large steel bike U-lock. The webbing was kept in the native anti-slippage mechanism for the Balanced Community Alpine Web Lock 5 using an oval aluminum carabiner, and it was removed maybe 2 to 3 times through the season. The samples that I sent to Ryan came from several places of interest along the webbing. For example, from the segment that was in the anti-slippage mechanism, or from the segment where most people mounted the webbing and it saw the most number of leash falls. I also sent him every sewn end from the rig, as well as several samples from along the webbing, including from the tails that were kept in watertight dark bags at the anchors. We currently have the same rig up this season, except we're using Mark 2 of Balanced Community's lift tube, and we've updated the leash ring to be one of Balanced Community's aluminum big loops. And we're no longer using the native anti-slippage mechanism on the Alpine 5. We're updating it to the poppable fisherman, according to Jerry's updated recommendation. Send me a message if you're in the area and you want to check out Moonshine or anything else we have going on in the greater North Fork Valley.
Now, before we do our first brake test, a little context is the MBS, or minimal braking strength, of lift 2B is 21.5 kilonewtons. Now, you don't always get that when you put your webbing in a web lock or have a sewn loop, or especially if you tie a knot. So it's not often you're going to get that number, but if you get close, it's super strong enough. Now, the amount of force you're putting on a line is about, when you fall, 6 kilonewtons. Now, on this length of webbing, nylon, it might only be, honestly, 2, 3, or 4 kilonewtons. But if you're trying to do freestyle, your line's super tight and you're over 200 pounds or over 80 kilograms or something, then you can get up to 8 kilonewtons. So just keep those numbers in mind when you look at the results of what we get. Now keep in mind, webbing will always break either in the back of the web lock or at the first bar tack if it's healthy webbing. Now, if for some reason it broke right smack dab in the middle, it was either got exposed to acid or something's very, very wrong with it, like it's half torn or something. So typically they'll break in the web lock or at the sew and loop. So in our first test, we tested a backup loop and terminated it into a web lock. And you can see that the webbing kind of curly cues over time because it's been exposed so long. But when we pulled it, we got 17.32 kilonewtons, which is about 80% strength of its MBS. You can see that the second backup test we did also broke at 17.34 kilonewtons, which is amazing. We're getting this much of a consistent result. Also about 80% strength, and it also broke in the back of the web lock. Now the third backup looks just like the other two, and when we pulled it, it basically broke a lot lower at 13.37 kilonewtons, or 62% of its MBS. And you can see that the sew and loop still kind of looks fine, but the back of the web lock, it's all melted together, and which is not abnormal, but I can't believe that we got a force that low. And I'm not quite sure what to think about that because technically 13 kilonewtons too low. And I had 2 load cells, so I knew it was I know it's 13, I know it's right. So I don't know what to think about that. Now the fourth backup loop, we have a feeling has never really been used. It might have been the part that was in the bag because it broke at 20.64 kilonewtons, which is really close to its MBS. I rarely get webbings breaking that close to MBS, and this is technically a year old, and whether or not you're using it, nylon will degrade over time. So this was a great result. Now I'm still kind of hung up on that 13 kilonewton third sample we did. Now our fifth test was the main line, but it was the part that was untensioned and left in a bag, and you can see kind of how curly Q that webbing became. And when we pulled it, it also broke in the back of the web lock and kind of melted to itself again, and it broke at 20.53 kilonewtons, which is super duper good enough considering it's a year old. So the second mainline test we did was a part that was under tension for a year, and when we pulled it, it also broke in the back of the web lock, not the sew and loop, and it broke at 20.42 kilonewtons, or super strong enough. The third mainline test was also under tension. When we pulled it, we got 17.83 kilonewtons, which is quite a bit lower than the 20 we got before, but it's still 80% of its MBS, which is probably super good enough, depending who you ask. And the fourth mainline loop we tested also broke in the back of the web lock at 18.44 kilonewtons, which is about 85% of its MBS, which is amazing that 1, they are all breaking in the back of the web lock, and 2, that we're getting numbers technically this high. This is pretty good for webbing that's been under tension for a year. So this ninth test we did was a spot on the webbing where they had a slippage, where it kind of melts the webbing if the webbing is going to slip inside of the web lock if you don't tie it off correctly. And the question is basically, is it compromised? If it breaks in the back of the web lock, well, it's still super good enough technically. And when we pulled it, it did break in the back of the web lock, ironically at 20.26 kilonewtons, or what I would consider full strength. And for the last test, we tested the section that was fallen on the most, that had the most wear and tear. And when we put it web lock to web lock, it of course is going to break in the back of one of the web locks, and it broke at 20.31 kilonewtons, which is pretty amazing. Now I love tests like this because if everything was breaking at 17, 18, or even 20 kilonewtons, then you might be tempted to leave it up longer than you should. This outlier of a 13 kilonewton is probably why you have a safety ratio. Not everything is sterile, and so if you're gonna have something break lower than it should, that's why you have some safety margin. And there are some standards out there they're trying to establish on what the safety margin should be. But it's technically up to you. It's your life and your risk, and you should just understand that you should have at least a 3-to-1 safety ratio in most people's opinion. I have tinkered with 2-to-1 safety ratios. I don't recommend it. And if you were to whip on something that breaks at 13 kilonewtons and you're putting about 6 on it, you don't have a lot of room for error. So ideally you have a 3-to-1 or ideally a 5-to-1 safety ratio, but it's not always realistic. It's hard to achieve webbing that's going to be that strong. The web locks, the anchors, the rings, all of that is like super, super bomber. Even your leash breaks, I think, at around 20 kilonewtons. You're only putting like 1 or 2 on it. It's really comes down to the webbing. And that's why we focused on this part of the permanent rig. Now what you have to ask yourself is, do you swap out the webbing after it becomes dangerous, or do you do it while there's still a little life in it and you're not playing in the red zone? Wade has been swapping this out annually so far, and I think that's definitely within a good safety margin. When I had my permanent rig up, I think I had swapping it out every 18 months. So I'd go about 6 seasons, and then I'd switch it out with some new stuff. And it always just feels good knowing you have good webbing under you if, I don't know, if that's what's holding you. Now I'm gonna do a small buying guide gear review thing because I don't make enough Slackline videos to just kind of make this isolated by itself. And you can actually see all my spreadsheet. I'll put in the link below of all the episodes we've got coming out. I am trying to budget like 20 to 30 videos next year for Slackline and Highline content. And we can hopefully include more of this in there. Balance Community has a new webbing called Paradigm. And Ian Eisenberg, who is the freestyle master right now, has helped design this thing to be exactly the perfect webbing for freestyle. It is also like Lift 2B in the fact that it's 100% nylon, but it's basically got a different weave, a different finish, and it's got twisted yarns. There's a lot of options that you can do when making a rope or webbing, and so when you start tinkering and changing how the thing is made, not just the material, you can actually come up with a very different result. And Jerry has really mastered the webbing process, and Ian really knows what you need when you freestyle. And so that is one of the most popular freestyle webbings out there right now. What's exciting to see is that leash rings are finally getting bigger. They used to be like 2 inches or 50 millimeters and steel, and we used to tape 2 of them together, and we don't really need to do that. I love redundancy, but you're not putting enough force on these rings that are rated for like 60 kN, and you're putting 1 or 2 on them. Just tie in, you'll be fine. The big loop has 80 millimeter inside diameter. That is over 3 inches big on the inside, which is really nice when you're trying to pass over segments or you have a bunch of twists in your line. But what's cool is it's also wide. It's 16 millimeters wide, so it doesn't put too much force on just one point of the webbing. And it only weighs 90 grams. It's pretty light. The BC Spanny is basically a purple span set that Jerry redesigned to be thinner and lighter than the previous version. I love span sets because they're so abrasion resistant, and abrasion is one of the biggest risks in building any anchor or whatever. And if you are going to slackline in the park, it is wonderful to just throw a span set around a tree. Of course, use padding. I use purple span sets all the time now, and these things are easy to handle. And another new webbing that Balance Community has is Jelly Pro, which is a great playful webbing if you're just gonna rig something like 50-meter highline, or if you want to slackline in the park. It is a polyester tubular webbing. So usually the tubular webbings, the kind that you can roll and you can feel that is hollow inside, is basically always nylon. Even though Jelly Pro is polyester, within that 1 to 4 kilonewton range, which is what you're using it at, it's playful, stretchy, bouncy, and fun, but it doesn't continue to just stretch when you're trying to tension it or get off the ground in the park. So it does just kind of have a nice stretch curve like a polyester webbing does, but you get a lot of the benefits that you would get in like more of a nylon or a blend webbing. And Jerry is finally shipping his 6th generation of the popular Alpine weblock. This thing has bigger anchor holes, 2 beckets, so you can use it like a rigging plate, and you can actually attach a soft release to this thing. But the pin is not perfectly round now, so it doesn't spin, tangling up your keeper cord. That's the new feature with this one. And it's 84 kilonewtons MBS, and I asked him how he got that, and he showed me the diagram of how they attach a 90 kilonewton Dyneema webbing, and then he showed me a picture of how it broke. And so it's super cool to see carnage. So this thing is bomber. So there'll be links and descriptions of everything I'm talking about. If you click those links before you go buy any of this, it does help support this channel. That's how affiliate links work. And Balance Community is based in the United States, and I'm going to be sharing Spider Slacklines and Slack Inov their gear in just a minute, and they're based out of Europe. And so they both ship internationally, so you can get stuff from wherever, but it'll be nice to show you a little bit more variety. The first gear that I'm actually most excited about is the Vortex 2, because you can just put this thing on. It's like literally a carabiner. You can just put this on after you rig the Highline. I always forget to put my leash rings on Highlines. Even our Sweden 2.1 kilometer long Highline, we forgot to put it on and we put the leash rings right there.
You warned us.
This thing's super simple to get on, and it uses a knot we're familiar with, which is a figure 8, as opposed to the barrel knot, which once it cinches down, you take a couple whips, like the leashes that are attached to the thimble rings, they're permanent. I cannot get them undone. It is not a knot meant to be untied. But this is something we all know and love and are familiar with, figure 8. The only trick with these is that you want to make sure that the figure 8 is as close to the ring as possible. So you just cinch that up, and then that will prevent anything from getting snagged in here, and it's a bomber. Carabiners have been around ropes for a long time. There's nothing that's going to get damaged in here if you just tie it the way I have it, and it can't come off. And before releasing this product, they did a ton of testing with freestyle highliners, the bounciest and whipperiest of all highliners. So it doesn't hurt the webbing, and it's super bomber. Now, one cool thing I like about the Spyder Slacklines is they actually sew the end, and that way the center rope, there's a rope inside of this tubular webbing, and that makes it nice and easy to grab, but they sew it so it doesn't stick out all funny like so many leashes do. Now, Spyder Slackline does have a normal leash ring too, and it's also 80 millimeters inside diameter, just like Balance Communities. It's 99 grams, and it's also wide, so it doesn't put too much pressure on a single part of your webbing. It's spread out like you would have on a double ring that were taped together back in the day. Being rated for 35 kilonewtons, I would use a single ring, no problem, for normal highlining. Next thing is soft shackles. Both Balance Community and Spyder Slackline sells soft shackles, and if you only are gonna grab some for like the anchor or one segment, just buy them. They're such a pain in the butt to make. I don't even make them anymore because they're such a hassle. We have a lot of videos on this channel on how to tie these or even the easy soft shackles, but these are nice. Now, if you are gonna buy them, they do make them out of the higher quality SK78 Dyneema rather than the SK75 that I normally use. You can get all the different qualities on extremegear.org if you wanna buy some Dyneema to make your own. But what I like about the Spyder Slackline soft shackle is the bungee cord that comes on this thing. It is nice and peace of mind for you to do that, so you know it won't come off. Now, if you've ever tried to open these things under load, you know they're not gonna come off at all, even without a bungee or tape. But sometimes if I'm doing segments, then in their SK75, I'll try to put like climbing tape on here to close the throat, but you don't need to do that for these. Then the tape gets all sticky right here. The Dyneema chafe cover helps with abrasion protection, lasts longer. I do like that for things like the anchor soft shackles. Segmented soft shackles, it kind of is a little too bulky, I think. A fun fact is Inov came up with the soft shackle where you do the eight shape with soft shackle, and then you take the backup soft shackle on the backup loops and you go inside the main one. And that made it possible that all you need is simple sewn loops, which is all I wanted on my webbing. So I had the courage to cut all of my webbing because of Inov and because of what they came up with the soft shackles. Now I double wrap like a 4mm soft shackle to get the loops even closer, and we W the backup. So things have progressed, but because of Inov, I cut all my webbing, and therefore a lot of other people cut their webbing, and now it's really common for people to buy 50 to the max like 100-meter segments with sewn loops on the end, and you connect them with soft shackles. So not just used at anchors anymore, and they're not just used for ultralight highlining, they're becoming more and more common. Now, if you are gonna make your own, you can just buy Dyneema and have a soft shackle party if you're trying to make like 20 or 30 of these things for big long highlines. But honestly, like if you're just doing that many, sometimes it's nice just to use a quick link and then just make the backups long 5mm and W the thing through the whole system. We'll have other videos on that soon. We have some already out. But I just wanted you to know that you can buy these soft shackles from these legitimate Slackline shops, and you know that they're tied correctly and they're all proof loaded, tested, chafe covered, and bungeed. So you don't have to deal with all of that. Another cool soft shackle thing is this shirt. Yeah, wraps all the way around. hownottoswag.com if you want a soft shackle shirt. Spyder also has Rolexes. It's a single wheel here, and they are essential if you are highlining and don't have a roller. Everyone should have one on them. This is the kind of thing that you don't want to lend out because you're never going to see it again. This webbing here is Sky Diamond. It is what we used in Sweden for the 2.1 kilometer long highline. This is 17 millimeters wide, so it doesn't have the surface area for wind to grab it. It makes it lighter, and so it's perfect for long highlines. The newest version of this has polyester and Vectrin woven into the Dyneema fibers. Dyneema webbing is what makes this high tech, low stretch, strong, lightweight. But they wove in some other fibers in here, so now it's finally grippable by highline grips, slackline grips. Now, one trick you could do with high-tech webbings, which is honestly a whole nother video, is don't make it the entire highline. Take the last 100 meters of a giant highline and add something that's really easy to grab in 25 millimeters and something that fits in all your standard web blocks, and then you can connect the rest of this all the way out. Because by the time you tension it up, you only have less than 50 meters of the other stuff in there. Very grabbable. It's what we did on the 861 meter California highline that we rigged, is we threw in a bunch of my Spyder silk that was, old and sticky, so it was grabbed really easy. And then the rest was a different Dyneema webbing. Another thing unique to Spyder and Inov Slacklines is the Infinity. This is the 2.0 version, and I keep my webbing in it permanently because I go to the same spot all the time. So I put the sew-in loop on the far tree, and then I just connect this to my tension tree, and then I just do my thing, and it's tensioned in minutes. Something you don't need for the park, but I have, is this tapeless technology, where they sew this 2 millimeter cord on there, and you literally tie the highline back up to the main. And that kind of leaves things freely moving, but you don't have tapes breaking. That's pretty niche, I would consider, and kind of a pain in the ass when you're just using it as a park line, but I had it. And so this Joker webbing is only 4% stretch. It's a polyester webbing, and it's great for setting up lines in the park because most nylon webbings suck to try to tension and not touch in the middle. Let me know if you guys like gear reviews mixed in with videos where we're brake testing stuff. I'm always trying to slack snap my audience and seeing what you guys like. Hit this on your way to the hownottoswag.com store. Cheers.